The morning in Kansas was quiet in a way that made everything feel sharp. The mist hung low over the driveway, coating the gravel with a thin film of dampness that clung to the soles of my shoes. The garage door was half open, and the silver truck I had packed the night before waited under the weak light. Tomorrow, I was supposed to be gone, driving west toward Colorado. I thought I was leaving behind everything that had kept me silent. I didn't know the silence was about to shatter. I saw him before I heard him. Mark stood near the front of the truck like he had been waiting. His arms were folded across his chest, a manila envelope in his hand. He always moved quietly, like someone who wanted to control the air around him. His eyes locked onto me with that flat look that had followed me since I was 13. I slowed down but didn't back away. I already knew what was in that envelope. He stepped forward, the crunch of his boots on the gravel unnervingly steady. I stayed near the garage threshold. He raised the envelope slightly and said, "All you have to do is sign." His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every threat he never had to repeat out loud. I kept my arms loose at my sides and didn't answer. He added, "This will make everything easier. Your name is already on it. Just sign it." My pulse ticked faster. He was talking about the fake company, the one he had built using my name, my credit, my record. Another piece in the long chain of fraud he thought would keep me tied to him forever. He wanted to make sure I couldn't walk away clean. I shook my head once. He whispered more than spoke. "You will sign." I said no. His face changed. His jaw tightened, his mouth went thin, and I saw the decision before he moved. His arm shot forward. His fist slammed into my chest with a force that felt like it cracked the world open. Pain exploded under my ribs. The air rushed out of me in a gasp that never made a sound. I fell backward onto the wet gravel. My spine struck the ground. The world tilted sideways, then upside down. A ringing sound filled my ears, high and relentless. My chest seized. I tried to breathe and couldn't. The sky above me was a pale, washed-out blue. A single leaf spiraled down through my blurred vision. He moved over me, blocking the light. His shadow pressed down as hard as his fist had. He crouched close enough that I could smell stale coffee and motor oil. "You are not going anywhere," he said softly, and it was the softness that scared me more than the punch. My body ached. My lungs clawed for air. His hand grabbed the collar of my sweatshirt and twisted. His knuckles dug into my throat. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Over his shoulder, I saw it, the tiny blue light on the dashcam blinking. I had set the camera the night before to record automatically if it detected movement or noise. I forgot to turn it off. It was recording everything. He leaned closer, his mouth near my ear, and whispered, "No one will believe you." He didn't know that the camera was already sending the footage to cloud storage. He didn't know that someone was watching. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Bill, the neighbor, standing on his porch in a flannel pajama shirt with a coffee mug in hand. Bill was a retired cop. He had seen the tension in this house before. But this time, he had seen the hit. His face hardened as he set the mug down and reached for his phone. Mark didn't notice him at first. His entire focus was on me. He pulled tighter on my sweatshirt, expecting the same silence he had trained into me over years. But the ground had shifted. He turned his head slightly when he caught movement at the fence. Bill was already dialing. I felt the gravel biting into my palms. I could not speak. My chest burned, but for the first time in a long time, I did not feel completely trapped. The ringing in my ears began to fade. A sharp breath tore its way back into my lungs. The dash cam blinked steady and cold, a small machine holding the truth. Mark's eyes narrowed, searching my face for the old fear, the quiet obedience he expected. It wasn't there anymore. I didn't need to say a word. The camera was speaking for me. I stared back at him, breathing through the pain, and thought with absolute clarity, this time I will not stay silent. When people talk about childhood, they often describe summer nights, birthday candles, or the way their mother's voice sounded when she called them in for dinner. My memories were different. Mine smelled like gasoline and control. I was 13 when Mark walked into our house for the first time. He wasn't loud, not at first. He was charming in that smooth, calculated way that makes everyone around him believe he is a good man. My mother believed it. She had worked double shifts for years after my father died, and Mark came along with easy promises. He fixed things around the house. He brought groceries. He filled the silences with stories about how safe we would be. What none of us understood back then was that his kindness was never free. It was a down payment. He didn't explode into control. He built it layer by layer the way a spider builds a web. The first year after they married, he started checking on my homework, then my phone, then the way I dressed, who I talked to when I came home, how much water I used, how long the lights stayed on. My mother told me it was because he cared. I knew it was because he wanted everything under his thumb. When I turned 16, he started making me hand over my part-time paychecks. He said it was family money, that everything went into one pot. What I didn't know was that the pot was his alone. He opened accounts in my name. I thought I was building savings. I was building debt. I can still remember the first time I saw one of those letters. A bank statement addressed to me for an account I never opened. He told me it was just paperwork. He told me not to ask questions. My mother didn't want to hear it. She told me to let it go. The way he wrapped his hand around the back of her chair during dinner said everything. She was scared of him, but she was too proud to admit it. And so I stayed quiet. At 18, I tried to leave. I packed my things in the middle of the night, my heartbeat so loud I thought he would hear it from down the hall. I made it as far as the front door before I saw the envelope taped to it. My name, my signature forged on a credit agreement. Tens of thousands of dollars in my name. It wasn't just control anymore. It was a trap. I remember sitting on the steps with the cold air biting through my jacket, realizing that if I walked out that door, the debt would follow me. He had taken my future and wrapped it around my neck like a chain. I didn't leave that night. Instead, I spent the next years working to fix what he had broken. I paid bills that weren't mine. I watched my credit crawl through the dirt while he used it like a loaded weapon. He never had to raise his voice after that. Every time I talked about leaving, he would remind me of what I owed. My name, my record, my mess. He would smirk and say, "Where are you going to run with that?" By the time I was 21, he had convinced my mother to put her accounts in his name too. She used to be independent. Over time, she started whispering instead of speaking. She cooked meals too perfectly, smiled too carefully. She moved like someone walking across thin ice. I saw the fear in her eyes even when she told me I was imagining things. She depended on him. That dependency bled into me. My life became a series of calculations, like living in a cage with the door open but chains around my ankles. If I ran, the mess he built with my name would collapse on top of me. If I stayed, at least I could keep watch. He was methodical. Every piece of my identity became another brick in his structure of control. He signed up for insurance policies in my name, applied for business permits, collected payouts on false claims, and wrapped it all in a neat layer of fake respectability. Everyone in town thought Mark was a hard worker, a man who took care of his family. No one saw the way he would look at me across the dinner table when I disagreed with him. That look was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. He never needed to hit me when I was younger. His control didn't come from bruises. It came from debt and silence. But silence is heavier than any fist. It settles on your chest until you start believing it belongs there. By the time I got the job at the logistics company, I thought I had learned how to live with it. I told myself I would save enough to leave to start over somewhere far away where his name couldn't find me. I built a small fund quietly, like a bird hiding scraps for winter. Colorado was the plan. Colorado was freedom. He didn't know about the job offer. At least I thought he didn't. He didn't know I had mapped the route, checked every rest stop, planned how to move my records out of state. I thought I had outsmarted him for once. But men like Mark don't just let go. They tighten their grip when they sense it slipping. Looking back, it feels like he always knew when I was close to escaping. That was when he smiled the most. That was when he turned on the charm, told my mother how proud he was of me, made the world believe we were a happy family. Behind closed doors, he counted every penny, tracked every move, filed every paper that kept me tethered. It's strange how control can become normal, how you can wake up one day and not remember what it felt like to breathe without permission. I was 29 when I realized the truth that had been waiting all along. He didn't need to chase me. He already owned the ground beneath my feet. That was why the moment on the gravel with his fist in my chest was more than violence. It was the wall cracking. It was the sound of a chain snapping under its own weight. I had spent more than half my life under his shadow. That morning with the dashcam blinking, I finally saw a way out. I finally saw a crack big enough to run through. It started with a single email. The subject line looked ordinary, just another bank alert that usually went straight to junk. But when I opened it, my hands went cold. It said a new loan account had been created in my name with an amount I could never have qualified for on my own. The date and time on the message were fresh, less than an hour old. My name sat there in black letters tied to something I had never signed. I clicked the link and stared at the screen. There it was, my name, my social security number, and a neat forged signature at the bottom of a loan agreement. The sender matched the bank I had used since high school, the one Mark knew about. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one that always came whenever I discovered a new lock he had placed on my life. I opened my laptop and searched the business name connected to the loan. Hale Freight Systems. I had never heard of it before, but the registered address was our house. He was using my identity to open companies now, not just credit cards. He was setting up something bigger. I felt my throat go dry. Colorado was supposed to be my clean break, the start of a life that belonged only to me. But Mark had built his trap long before I planned my escape. I scrolled through the documents attached to the email. They had already filed for commercial insurance using my name. This wasn't just fraud. It was a time bomb. If anything went wrong with that fake business, every signature, every document would lead straight to me. I shut the laptop, but the panic didn't close with it. The walls of the house felt smaller, like they were pressing against my shoulders. I knew this move. This was how Mark worked. He didn't need to lock me in a room. He locked me in paperwork. He built chains out of credit scores and forged signatures. He tied me to him without laying a finger on me, until this morning. I sat at the kitchen table, the light slanting through the blinds in thin, pale stripes. He had been watching me closely these last few weeks. He must have known something. Maybe it was the way I checked my phone more. Maybe it was the quiet joy I couldn't completely hide when I talked about Colorado to myself. He had always been able to smell freedom on me. He always crushed it. I folded the printed loan notice in half and slid it into my jacket pocket. I needed time to think. If I left now, the loan would follow me. If I stayed silent, he would bury me under more of these forged documents until there was no escape left. My head pulsed with anger. For years, I had accepted the trap as if it were just part of the air I breathed. But this time, something inside me moved differently. Something clenched. Something decided this was enough. I walked to the garage that night to check the truck again. I needed to leave early. Maybe if I left before he woke up, I could make it to the Colorado state line before he noticed. That was the plan. But plans don't survive men like Mark. When I opened the garage door, he was already there. He stood in the shadows like he had been waiting for me. His hand rested on the hood of the truck, and in his other hand was the same kind of envelope I had seen so many times before. I froze. He tilted his head and smiled without warmth. "You got mail," he said. His voice was smooth, almost amused. He held up the envelope. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained. More paperwork tying me to his empire of lies. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us in slow, controlled movements. "We're expanding," he said, as if this was some legitimate family business and not a criminal operation. "It'll be easier if you sign now." He didn't ask if I wanted to be part of it. He never asked. He only demanded. My throat tightened. "No," I said quietly. The smile disappeared. His jaw hardened. That flash of rage behind his eyes told me everything. He had built this entire setup assuming I would obey like I always did. He hadn't even considered what would happen if I said no. "Think carefully," he whispered. "This isn't just about me. It's about you. Your name is on everything. If this goes down, it's you they'll come for." That was the trap. It had always been the trap. He made me his shield, his legal scapegoat. He smiled again, but this time it was cold, sharp, final. The garage light flickered. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. The night was quiet, too quiet. His eyes locked on mine, waiting for the fear to settle in. But something was different this time. I wasn't frozen. I was furious. He took another step closer, close enough for me to feel his breath on my cheek. "You'll sign in the morning," he said. His tone wasn't a threat. It was a promise. He turned and walked away like the decision had already been made for me. But what he didn't know was that in that moment something inside me had already shifted. The fear that once felt endless had finally started to crack. I pressed my palm against the hood of the truck, feeling the cold metal ground me. This time, I would not sign. This time, I would not stay quiet. What I didn't know yet was how fast everything would unravel. In less than 12 hours, that envelope would lead to his fist. That fist would lead to the dashcam blinking in the morning light. That blink would be the beginning of the end. When the police lights finally flashed against the side of the house, it didn't feel real at first. The night air carried a strange stillness, the kind that clings to your skin and makes the sound of your own breathing louder than anything else. I sat on the gravel, my back pressed against the side of the truck, the cold cutting through the fabric of my sweatshirt. My chest still ached from the blow, every inhale sharp like glass. The officers stepped out of the cruiser with practiced calm hands resting near their belts, scanning the scene with measured eyes. Bill was already outside, waiting for them. His voice was low and firm as he talked to the first officer pointing toward the house. He had been on the other side of enough incidents in his years on the force to know exactly what to say. Mark didn't come outside right away. He stayed in the doorway like a shadow leaning against the frame with the casual confidence of a man who thinks he controls the narrative. When the officers asked to speak with me, I tried to answer, but my throat barely worked. The impact on my chest had left my breathing shallow, each word rasping out like it was fighting its way through a wall. I managed to tell them he hit me. One of them knelt down to shine a small light toward my collarbone and chest. The bruise hadn't surfaced yet, but the pain told its own story. They asked if I needed medical attention. I shook my head. I didn't want to leave. I needed to stay. I needed to protect the evidence that was still recording quietly on the dashcam. One of the officers asked Bill to give his statement. I watched him speak with that same quiet authority he carried when he wore the badge years ago. He described what he saw in simple words. No drama. Just fact. Mark finally stepped outside when he realized they were listening to someone other than him. He put on the same performance he had perfected for years, the voice soft, the gestures controlled, pretending to be the calm one. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "She slipped." I felt my fists curl at my sides. One of the officers glanced at the truck where the small blue light on the dashcam was still blinking. They didn't ask me about it then, but I saw the flicker of interest in their eyes. I kept quiet about the camera for now. I needed that footage safe. Mark's calm voice slid through the night like oil. He told them I was overreacting, that we had argued that I lost my balance. He even smiled like this was all routine. But the bruise already forming on my chest told another story, and so did the neighbor who had called 911. One of the officers stepped between him and me, a small gesture, but enough to make Mark's jaw clench. For years, he had lived inside this town, built his reputation carefully. He knew how to act polite in front of the law, but behind that mask, his eyes burned at me, not with confusion, but with warning. "You are making a mistake," those eyes said. "This will cost you." I held that stare, and for the first time I did not look away. The officers asked him to stay put while they finished taking statements. They didn't arrest him that night. I wasn't surprised. In cases like this, they usually don't without a clear confession or obvious injuries. I knew how the system worked. That was why Mark felt safe enough to stand there with his hands in his pockets like nothing had happened. He believed the night would swallow this incident the way it had swallowed so many before. But something had changed. There were eyes on him now. Bill's statement, the dashcam, my refusal to crumble. When they asked if I wanted a protective order, I said yes. I didn't hesitate this time. One of the officers gave me a card with a case number and instructions on what to do the next morning. My chest burned with every breath, But beneath that pain, there was a strange new weight, a weight that didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like the beginning of a fight. When the officers left, Bill stayed on the porch for a moment. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The way he looked at me was enough. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to respect. He knew what it meant to stand up to someone like Mark. Inside the house, Mark slammed the door. I could hear him pacing the hallway. The storm was building behind those walls, but I didn't follow him in. I leaned against the truck and pressed my palm over the sore spot on my chest. I could still feel the shape of his fist like a brand. The dash cam light glowed faintly in the dark, steady and unblinking. It had captured everything. For years, Mark's power came from the fact that no one ever saw the worst parts. But now, someone had. A machine had. And a retired cop had. That was enough to make him dangerous, but it was also enough to make him afraid. When I finally walked inside, he was waiting in the kitchen, arms folded, face hard. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He lowered his voice to that quiet tone that always used to make me shrink. "You think you're clever," he said. I didn't answer. My silence wasn't obedience anymore. It was armor. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing else. I went to my room and locked the door, something I had never dared to do before. My hands shook as I slid down the wall and sat on the floor. My chest hurt. My throat burned. But somewhere beneath all that pain, there was a pulse of something sharper. I realized I wasn't afraid of him the way I used to be. For the first time, I had something he didn't. Evidence, a witness, a crack in the wall he built around me. He didn't know it yet, but that night he had made his biggest mistake. The hit wasn't just violence. It was the beginning of the end. The house was too quiet that night, a kind of quiet that made every sound inside my head louder. The ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway felt like a hammer. Mark had gone to his room hours earlier, slamming the door behind him like he wanted the whole world to know he was still the one in control. But his control wasn't what it used to be. Something had shifted on that gravel, something irreversible. I sat on the floor with my back against my bedroom wall, staring at the faint strip of moonlight cutting across the carpet. My chest still throbbed where his fist had landed, but beneath the ache there was something solid and new, like the ground finally stopped tilting beneath my feet. I pulled the USB stick out of my jacket pocket. The file had finished transferring earlier, a perfect copy of the Dashcam recording sitting inside. I plugged it into my laptop. The first frame came up fast, grainy, but clear enough. I watched myself fall onto the gravel again, watched him lean over me, watched that small, damning moment over and over until my stomach knotted. It was strange seeing it from the outside. For years, I carried those bruises in silence because no one ever saw them. Now, I had proof. I ejected the USB and slipped it into the small metal box where I kept my passport and a single emergency credit card. My fingers were still shaking, but not from fear. It was something closer to adrenaline. I opened the company laptop I had borrowed and logged into the system. The dashcam footage wasn't just saved on the device. It had already uploaded automatically to the cloud backup the moment the impact sound hit. That was what Mark didn't know. I didn't need to hide it. It was already out there. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I opened the anonymous reporting page for the Insurance Crime Bureau. Tyler had once mentioned it during a conversation about logistics scams. At the time, I had brushed it off. Tonight, it felt like a lifeline. I attached the file, entered the minimal information required, and hit submit. A confirmation page popped up with a case number. It wasn't loud. It didn't make me feel heroic. But it was a crack in the wall, a clean line of resistance that could not be erased. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, not from panic this time, but from something steadier. I grabbed my phone and texted Tyler. I didn't explain everything. I just typed 3 words, "I have proof." He called almost immediately. His voice was low, cautious, like he already understood the weight behind those words. I told him about the video, about Mark, about the loan application and forged signatures. There was a pause on the other end, then he said, "We can build a case." The word we made something inside me unlock. For so long it had been just me against him. But now not anymore. Tyler explained what he could do from his side, how he could flag the fraudulent accounts through internal networks, how he could make sure the right people noticed. I stayed quiet, listening, clutching the phone like it was the first rope thrown to someone drowning. After the call ended, I turned to the other thing I needed to do, the protective order. The officer had given me instructions earlier. I went online and filled out the form, every box, every sentence typed with hands that finally felt steady. For the first time in years, I was building something of my own, a wall that wasn't made to keep me in, but to keep him out. I hit submit. A copy was emailed back to me with a confirmation that I could appear at the courthouse in the morning. It wasn't safety. Not yet. But it was a boundary. A real one. I closed my laptop again and listened to the house breathe. The pipes groaned softly. Somewhere a floorboard popped. I wondered if Mark was awake behind his door, if he could feel the quiet slipping out of his control. He had no idea that the walls he built around me were already cracking. I moved slowly to the garage, careful not to make the old floor creak. The night air hit my face like a cold slap, but it was clean. The truck sat there motionless, almost ordinary. But the dashcam light was still glowing faintly. That tiny, blinking dot had become something larger than it was designed to be. It wasn't just a camera anymore. It was a witness. I walked to the passenger side and reached for the memory card. I didn't take it out, just made sure it was secured. My fingerprints tingled with the strange mix of fear and control. He was still dangerous. I wasn't naive, but I wasn't cornered anymore either. I whispered to the empty garage, "You're not the only one who has power now." In the kitchen, the floorboards groaned. I froze. The house held its breath. Then it went silent again. I returned to my room, locked the door, and leaned against it. This wasn't the kind of fear that made me fold into myself like it used to. This was the kind of fear that wakes something up. I pulled out a notepad and started listing everything I could remember: dates, conversations, accounts, the name of every fake company he had mentioned in passing. I filled line after line, connecting dots I used to ignore because ignoring was easier. By the time the first light of dawn bled through the blinds, the notepad was half full. I stared at the list and felt the edges of something like strength. Not the loud cinematic kind, but the quiet, relentless kind that grows after years of swallowing pain. I tucked the notepad inside my bag next to the USB. I checked my phone. A message from Tyler waited. He had already flagged the company in the National Logistics Fraud Database. He ended the message with 3 words, "We've got him." I pressed my palm over my chest, the ache still deep but not as sharp. My breath came easier. In less than 12 hours, he would realize the world wasn't bending around him anymore. The silence that used to suffocate me had turned into something else entirely. It had become a weapon. I wasn't whispering anymore. I was building a wall of proof, and this time it wouldn't crumble. Morning light came through the blinds in thin, sharp lines. It was the kind of light that doesn't warm a room, but makes everything clearer. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee I barely tasted. The house was still like it was holding its breath. Mark hadn't come out of his room yet, but I could hear the faint shuffle of his footsteps above. He was awake. I could feel it. That used to scare me. Now it only made me sharper. My phone buzzed against the table. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. I picked up before it rang twice. His voice was low, steady, like someone who had already started working the problem before I even asked. "I talked to someone," he said. "The footage you sent is strong. It's clear. And with your neighbor's statement, this isn't just assault. It connects to something bigger." I didn't speak. I just listened. He continued. "The company he used, Hale Freight Systems, isn't the only one. It's part of a chain. We've been tracking similar shell companies in multiple states. He's not just committing insurance fraud. He's tied to a network that's already on the radar of federal investigators." My fingers tightened around the phone. For years, I thought Mark's control was small and personal, something built in the shadows of one house. But now I could see it clearly. It was bigger, and that meant it could fall harder. Tyler explained how the Insurance Crime Bureau worked with federal agencies, how cases like this moved fast when they involved interstate fraud. "But we need more than the dashcam," he said. "We need a trail, anything that links him directly to those companies." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I already knew where that trail was. My house wasn't just a cage, it was a filing cabinet. Mark kept everything close because he believed no one would ever touch it. I spent the next 2 hours digging. I moved silently through the hallway, the boards creaking under my bare feet, careful not to draw attention. In his office, the air smelled like stale paper and burnt coffee. He wasn't there. He never expected me to walk into his space. I opened the cabinet drawers one by one. Bank statements, insurance forms, corporate filings, shipping manifests, invoices with forged signatures. My name everywhere. His name nowhere. He thought hiding behind my identity would protect him forever. My hands shook as I slid the documents into a folder. Not from fear. From something close to rage. It wasn't just the lies. It was the years he made me live inside them. Upstairs, a door opened. I froze. His footsteps moved toward the stairs. I closed the cabinet, tucked the folder under my sweater, and slipped back into the hallway. By the time he came down, I was already in the kitchen pouring more coffee, like I'd been there all along. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes narrowed just enough to tell me he was suspicious, but not sure why. "You're up early," he said. I kept my voice calm. Couldn't sleep. He watched me for a moment, then grabbed his keys and left. He was meeting someone. He always left early when he had work that didn't fit inside the law. The sound of his truck pulling out of the driveway was the softest kind of relief. I waited 3 full minutes after the sound faded before moving again. Back in my room, I laid the folder on the bed and snapped photos of every document with my phone. I uploaded them directly to the same encrypted cloud as the Dashcam footage. Then, I sent copies to Tyler. His response came almost instantly. "This is exactly what we need." My breath caught for a second. For years, I had been surrounded by this paper, and it meant nothing but weight. Now it was leverage. Tyler explained that the Bureau could fast-track the case to a federal level. It would mean investigators looking into every fake company tied to my name, every transaction, every signature. If Mark thought he was untouchable, this was going to prove him wrong. Tyler also told me to protect myself. He's going to know something's happening. People like him always do, he said, but if he finds out too late, he can't stop it. I pressed my hand to my chest, still sore from the punch. "He won't find out," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. I drove into town that afternoon. The courthouse was a square building with faded bricks and a flag that barely moved in the wind. Filing for the protective order was quiet, almost mundane. I signed the papers. The clerk stamped them. The order wasn't permanent yet, but it would force him to keep his distance or face arrest. That single piece of paper felt heavier than anything he'd ever held over me. When I walked back to the truck, I saw the reflection of the dashcam light on the windshield. The blinking blue dot had become something like a heartbeat I could trust. Tyler called again as I was driving home. "They're moving on this," he said. "They'll freeze accounts tied to those companies as early as tomorrow. If he tries to use them, it will trigger alerts." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. It was happening faster than I expected. For once, time was on my side. That night, I went through the house room by room, carefully collecting anything that might connect to him. Old notebooks, receipts, flash drives, burner phones he thought I didn't know about. I photographed everything. Every click of the camera felt like a nail in the coffin he had built for himself. The fear that used to cling to me had thinned, replaced by something sharper. It wasn't hope, it was precision. It was the steady realization that power doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from proof. When I finally sat down again, the folder was lighter, but the evidence was everywhere else, living in places he couldn't reach. Tyler texted me a short update before midnight. "Feds have it. Don't tip him off." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I knew Mark would sense something soon. He was too careful not to. But he didn't know that for the first time in years, I wasn't behind him. I was ahead. I locked the bedroom door and listened to the quiet house. His footsteps passed in the hallway hours later, slow and deliberate. I didn't flinch. The game had changed. He just didn't know it yet. The dashcam light blinked once from the truck outside. I whispered to myself, not out of fear, but as a promise. "You won't win this time." The first sign that Mark sensed something was wrong came 3 nights later. It was subtle at first, just the way he moved through the house, slower, quieter, like a predator circling the edge of something it could no longer see clearly. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He simply watched. And Mark watching was far more dangerous than Mark talking. I felt his eyes on me in every corner of the house, measuring, weighing, trying to find the crack that would tell him how much I knew. By then, the evidence was out of his reach. Tyler had confirmed the accounts were under federal review, the Insurance Crime Bureau had escalated the case, and several of the companies tied to my name were already frozen. I didn't tell anyone at work. I moved carefully, spoke carefully, breathed carefully. But something in the air around Mark had changed. It felt like static just before a storm breaks. That night, I left work late. The air outside was cool and sharp, the kind of chill that usually made me feel safe. But the moment I stepped into the driver's seat of the truck, I felt it. A thin resistance on the brake pedal. Not much, just enough to make my stomach drop. I turned the engine off and stepped out with my phone flashlight. On the ground beneath the truck, there was a small dark streak that caught the light. Brake fluid. My hands went cold. He had done it. He had actually cut the line. He was escalating. I walked back into the office building and waited under the flickering fluorescent light in the lobby until Bill arrived. He didn't ask many questions when I called. He didn't need to. When he knelt down beside the truck, his jaw clenched the way it used to when he wore the badge. "This isn't an accident," he said. "You need to call this in." But I shook my head. Not yet. The order hadn't been served to him officially. If I called it too early, he might shift tactics. If I waited just a little longer, his own moves would trap him deeper. Bill didn't like it, but he understood. He tightened the temporary line himself so I could at least drive home safely. But that night, the silence around the house didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like being hunted. Mark didn't look at me when I walked in, but he didn't have to. He sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wall ahead. His stillness was worse than anger. Anger I knew how to handle. Stillness meant he was calculating. I could almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate. My heart slammed into my ribs, but I didn't turn on the lights. I just lay there and listened. Gravel shifted, the sound of someone breathing too close to the house. I knew it was him. He wanted me to know. The next morning, I filed the formal complaint and upgraded the protective order to an emergency one. The clerk told me the sheriff would serve him within 24 hours. I thanked her and walked out of the courthouse with the paper folded tightly in my hand. My fingers ached from holding it so hard. Tyler called as I was getting into a loaner car Bill had helped me arrange. He didn't like me driving the truck anymore. "He's not going to stay quiet for long," Tyler said. "These guys get dangerous when they lose control." I told him about the brake line, the footsteps, the way Mark had gone silent. There was a pause on the line, then he said, "That means you're close." I knew he was right. The closer predators get to being cornered, the more desperate they become. I wasn't scared in the way I used to be. I wasn't paralyzed. I was focused. Every move he made was another piece of proof. I made sure to document everything, the photo of the brake fluid, the voicemail he left at work, pretending to check on me the car parked across the street 2 nights in a row. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was sloppy. Bill started checking in twice a day, sometimes just parking his truck at the curb like a silent guard dog. He knew how these things worked. He had seen it play out before. Mark was circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. But I had spent too many years living in his shadow to give him one. One night, just after midnight, I heard the sound again. This time, I didn't freeze. I quietly slid my phone onto record mode and crept to the window. The porch light was off, but the moon gave me enough to see his silhouette standing near the edge of the driveway, his hands balled into fists. He wasn't trying to break in. He was reminding me that he could. I didn't step outside. I didn't scream. I let him stand there long enough for the recording to capture his face when he looked up at my window. That look used to make me shrink. Now I just watched him. He left after 5 minutes. That was enough. I sent the video to Tyler and Bill. Bill forwarded it directly to the sheriff's office. Tyler logged the timestamp with the insurance case. Every step he took was now building a wall around him that he didn't even see. The next day, the sheriff showed up with the papers. Mark didn't fight it. He smiled when they handed him the protective order. That smile was worse than his silence. It said he thought the paper didn't matter. It said he still believed he could crush me before anyone else did anything about it. But this time, he was wrong. That night, I didn't go home. Bill and Tyler insisted I stay at the old logistics office. It was just an empty building with a couch and a coffee maker, but it felt safer than the house where the walls still held his shadow. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and lay there listening to the hum of the vending machine down the hall. I wasn't waiting to be hunted anymore. I was waiting for him to slip. And he would. People like Mark always do. At 3 in the morning, the security camera at the office caught his truck driving slowly past the lot. I didn't panic. I logged the time and sent the image to Tyler. Every line of evidence was another nail. Every threat was another knot in the rope pulling him down. I was tired, but it was the kind of tired that comes with purpose. I wasn't running. I was holding ground. And for the first time in my life, Mark wasn't the one setting the rules. The morning after he drove past the logistics office, I woke up to the sound of Bill knocking on the metal door. It wasn't the kind of knock that carried fear. It was steady, patient, the kind of sound that reminded me I wasn't alone anymore. I opened the door to find him holding a thermos of coffee in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. The October air wrapped around us, sharp and dry. "You're not staying here alone another night," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a line drawn in gravel. Bill had always been a quiet neighbor, the kind of man who waved from his porch but never pried. But ever since that morning with the dashcam, something in his eyes had changed. He didn't just see what happened. He decided to stand on my side of the line. He handed me the thermos and stepped into the office like he had already made up his mind. "The sheriff's department is taking it seriously now," he said. "Your case isn't just a line on paper anymore." He unfolded the newspaper and tapped the corner of a local article. "Insurance fraud ring under investigation." It didn't name Mark, but the dates and details were too close to be coincidence. My pulse thudded hard. This was moving faster than even I had expected. Tyler arrived a few minutes later. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from long nights digging through data, but there was something electric in his eyes. "They froze 3 more accounts," he said, "and the Bureau issued a formal referral to the feds. Mark's not dealing with state cops anymore. He's dealing with people who don't play nice." I wrapped my hands around the warm thermos and let his words settle into my bones. For years, Mark had been the shadow in every corner of my life. He moved like someone who thought no one could touch him. Now that shadow wasn't getting bigger. It was shrinking. Tyler spread out a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of corporate filings, insurance claims, and flagged transactions. Every single one of them bore my name. But next to each, in bright red ink, was the word fraudulent. Seeing those pages spread out like a map made something tighten in my throat. For so long, this paperwork was what kept me trapped. Now it was going to be what freed me. "The FBI will take the lead," Tyler said. "But they'll want clean evidence. Your dashcam footage, the bank statements, your witness. That's what's going to make this bulletproof." Bill leaned back against the wall with his arms crossed, watching me the way a man watches a storm gather in the right direction for once. "I gave my statement," he said simply. "Full and official. They've got it on record now. No way he talks his way out of that punch." My throat burned, but not from fear. This was different. It was like breathing air after years underwater. I nodded once slowly. "Thank you," I said. He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just finish this." For years I had believed no one would ever step in. The kind of quiet men like Mark build depends on that belief. They make you think you're alone, that no one sees, that no one cares. But people do see. Bill had seen. Tyler had acted. And now the law was watching too. That night, I didn't go back to my old house. I stayed at the office again, but this time it didn't feel like hiding. It felt like holding ground. Bill parked his truck near the entrance, headlights pointed toward the road. Tyler brought in his laptop and worked through the night, forwarding every shred of evidence to the Bureau's secure portal. For the first time, the silence wasn't just mine to carry. It belonged to a team. Around midnight, I walked outside, wrapped in a thin jacket, the night air cold enough to sting my nose. Bill was sitting in his truck engine off, hands folded on the steering wheel. He glanced at me but didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Just being there was enough. It's a strange thing when fear that once lived in your skin starts to lose its weight. It doesn't disappear all at once. It slips away in pieces. Every statement Bill made, every file Tyler sent, every account the feds froze pulled one more thread out of the net Mark had wrapped around me. By the third day, the sheriff's department increased patrols around the office and the house. A marked cruiser parked across the street at night. That alone changed everything. Mark wasn't just the shadow anymore. He was being watched. People like him hated that. He thrived in darkness. Now the lights were on. The feds scheduled a preliminary interview with me. Tyler sat across from me in the small conference room they borrowed from the courthouse. The agent on the other end of the video call was calm and direct, asking clear questions. I answered each one slowly, carefully, letting years of fear unravel into simple facts. They didn't need dramatics. They needed truth. When the call ended, Tyler leaned back and let out a breath he'd been holding. "That was solid," he said. "You did good." Bill met me outside after the interview. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. That quiet kind of support hit me harder than I expected. People talk a lot about heroes, but the truth is, sometimes they look like a neighbor with coffee or a friend with a laptop. That night, Mark tried to call me. He had avoided doing that directly since the protective order, but now his name flashed on the screen like a ghost. I let it ring out. 10 seconds later, a voicemail appeared. I didn't listen to it right away. I forwarded it to Tyler. He transcribed it and flagged it for the investigators. Every word he said now worked against him. He didn't understand that yet, but he would. A few hours later, the agent handling the case called to confirm they had everything they needed to proceed with federal charges. It wasn't over yet. But the ground had shifted. He wasn't hunting me anymore. The system was hunting him. Bill kept watch outside. Tyler kept feeding the case. And I, for the first time, wasn't just reacting. I was standing. I walked outside again just before sunrise. The mist hung low over the road, soft and pale. Bill nodded at me from his truck. Tyler waved from the doorway, bleary-eyed but determined. The fear wasn't gone. It never really goes away. But it wasn't mine alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The courthouse in Sedgwick County had always felt cold to me, even before I had a reason to be there. The building was built from pale stone that never seemed to catch sunlight. That morning, the light was flat and colorless as I climbed the concrete steps. Tyler walked beside me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, calm but alert. Bill followed just behind, wearing his old leather jacket like armor. I had dreamed about this moment for years without ever believing it would actually come. Mark was already inside. I could feel the weight of his presence, even from the parking lot. It was the first preliminary hearing in the federal insurance fraud case, but the assault charge was the spark that had cracked everything open. My chest tightened at the thought of seeing him again, but it wasn't the same fear that used to paralyze me. It was sharper now, colder, focused. The courtroom doors opened with a dull thud. Inside rows of wooden benches stretched beneath tall, colorless windows. The seal of the court hung above the judge's bench. Reporters lingered at the back not because of me, but because the case had grown bigger than one man's violence. The fraud ring stretched across state lines, and Mark's arrest had triggered a wave of subpoenas. My story was the doorway through which everything else came flooding in. He stood near the defense table wearing the same suit he used to wear at family gatherings, the one that always made him look respectable. His hair was combed too neatly. His expression was practiced. But his eyes found mine instantly, and in that small flicker I saw the man I'd grown up fearing. I didn't look away this time. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too many stories like this. The prosecution began with the timeline of the assault, laying out each detail with clinical precision. The date, the morning, the dashcam footage. My breath caught when they dimmed the lights and played the video. The image flickered onto the courtroom screen, grainy but unmistakable. Me on the gravel, Mark stepping forward, the punch, my body folding under the weight of it, the sound of my breath catching in my throat, the shadow of his face leaning down. Gasps rippled through the benches. People had read about it in the papers, but seeing it was different. The judge's face remained unreadable, but the silence in the room grew heavier. Bill sat behind me, his hands folded on the bench, his testimony already entered into the record. The prosecutor walked through it step by step, the auto record function, the cloud upload, the timestamp that matched the 911 call. Every fact was a stone in the wall being built around him. When the defense rose to speak, Mark's lawyer did exactly what I expected. She tried to make it small, a misunderstanding, a family argument, a moment of frustration taken out of context. She said I had fallen backward. She said the camera didn't capture everything. But the truth was simple. It didn't have to. It captured enough. Tyler leaned closer and whispered, "They're losing this part already." He was right. The jury wasn't impaneled yet, but the judge's expression was fixed and cold. The assault charge wasn't the biggest part of the case, but it was the anchor. It was the human part, the part that stripped away the polite mask he had worn for years. Then the prosecutor shifted gears. The federal agent who had been working the case stepped forward. He wasn't a man who liked wasting words. He laid out the fraud ring in clear, precise language. 10 shell companies in 3 states. Dozens of insurance claims. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved under my name without my consent. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer on the defense's carefully built story. My forged signature, the bank accounts, the fake shipping manifests, the emails he thought no one would ever read. Every single trail led back to him. The Dashcam footage had cracked the door open. The fraud had blown it off the hinges. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me, fingers pressed tightly together, breath measured. He shifted uncomfortably at the defense table. For the first time in years, I saw something flicker across his face that wasn't control. It was calculation. He was realizing he couldn't talk his way out of this one. Bill was called next. He walked to the stand with the kind of quiet gravity that didn't need embellishment. He had worn his old police badge for years before retiring, and it showed in the way he spoke. He didn't try to make me a hero. He didn't try to make Mark a monster. He just told the truth. How he saw the punch, how he called 911, how he watched Mark walk back into the house like nothing had happened. The defense tried to pick at his statement, but Bill was steady as stone. He had seen men like Mark before. Tyler testified after not as an emotional witness, but as the one who traced the paper trail. He explained how the companies were flagged, how the fraud network had been pieced together. The judge asked only a few questions, but each one cut deep into the defense's story. When it was finally my turn, my knees felt like water, but I walked to the witness stand anyway. The clerk had me raise my right hand and swear to tell the truth. The microphone felt too close when I sat down. The defense attorney tried to paint me as angry, vengeful, emotional, but she couldn't twist the facts. She couldn't erase the bruise documented that morning. She couldn't unmake the footage of his fist hitting my chest. She couldn't explain away the companies he had built under my name. I spoke slowly. I told the court how he had controlled me since I was 13, how he forged my signature, how he built his empire on my silence. And then I said the words that had lived inside my throat for years. This time I decided not to stay silent. The room went quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence itself carried more weight than any speech. Mark's eyes narrowed as if the weight of my voice landed where his control used to sit. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside him. The judge nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and said, "Continue." I told them about the night with the Dashcam, the moment when my breath caught in my chest and the blue light blinked like a quiet promise. I told them about the brake line, the footsteps outside the office, the protective order, the threats without words. The defense tried to object. The judge overruled. When I stepped down from the stand, my hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from release. Years of silence had built up in my bones, and now it was leaving all at once. The courtroom moved quickly after that. The prosecution called one more witness, an FBI agent who confirmed the connections between Mark and the wider fraud network. Numbers, transactions, emails, wire transfers. Hard evidence. There was nothing to twist. The judge's ruling came late in the afternoon. The room was full by then. Reporters, officers, people who had never met me but had followed the case. The assault charge alone would have carried weight, but combined with the fraud, it was overwhelming. The court finds sufficient evidence to hold the defendant for trial on all counts, the judge said. Bail is denied. Mark's jaw clenched. For the first time, his mask cracked. It wasn't rage. It wasn't charm. It was disbelief. The bailiff stepped forward. Mark turned his head toward me as they cuffed him, but I didn't flinch. His eyes tried to speak the language he had forced me to learn for years. But that language didn't work anymore. My silence was no longer his shield. It was my weapon. Tyler squeezed my shoulder as we walked out of the courtroom. Bill followed behind, silent but steady. Reporters called my name, but their voices sounded distant like static at the edge of a storm that had already broken. Outside, the sky had darkened to a soft gray. I stood on the courthouse steps, the air cold against my skin. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. I felt like I was standing in the open, breathing air that actually belonged to me. The dashcam light wasn't blinking anymore. It didn't need to. The truth was out. The man who had built his power on silence was now behind bars. As the wind moved through the trees, I heard Bill's voice low behind me. "You did it." I shook my head. We did it. And it was true. I hadn't stood alone in that courtroom. Tyler's evidence, Bill's testimony, the agent's investigation. It all came together like a tide rising against something that had stood too long. As we walked down the steps, I glanced back once at the courthouse doors. The fear wasn't gone. It never disappears completely, but it no longer owned me. That was enough. The day I left Kansas, the air carried that kind of autumn chill that smells like dry leaves and distant rain. The sky was a pale gray sheet, the kind that makes colors look muted, but to me, everything felt sharper than it ever had. The old truck sat in the driveway like a loyal witness, the dash cam light blinking steady and blue, just as it had the morning he hit me. The bruise had faded from my chest, but the memory of that breathless moment would never fully disappear. It didn't need to. It was no longer the mark of his power. It was the reminder of the day everything started to unravel for him instead of me. I closed the door of the house behind me slowly. The sound echoed against the empty walls. I had cleared everything out days ago, one box at a time, with Bill watching from the porch and Tyler bringing files from the bureau as the case moved forward. What remained in the house was only air, and even that seemed thinner than before. I walked through the hallway one last time, tracing my fingers against the wall where I had once leaned after long nights working overtime, after long nights wishing I had the courage to run. Now I was running, but not away. Forward. In the kitchen, the last thing I picked up was the small metal box that held the original Dashcam USB, the one I kept as my own copy. Tyler had sent encrypted backups to the federal servers, but this one was mine. The tiny weight of it in my pocket was strange comfort. It wasn't just evidence. It was proof that I had fought back. Outside, the wind caught at the hem of my jacket. Bill was already waiting in his truck, leaning against the door with a thermos of coffee in hand, like always. Tyler pulled up a few minutes later, his car loaded with 2 boxes of copies documents and the final packet from the lawyers. Everything about this day had been planned. It wasn't a dramatic escape. It was deliberate, clean, strong. "You're sure about Colorado?" Tyler asked as he helped load the last box into the back of the truck. His voice was steady, but I could hear the hint of care under it. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." Colorado wasn't just a place. It was the plan I had carried like a secret in my bones for years. A quiet dream, a different skyline, a life that didn't have his shadow bleeding into every corner. "The case will move without you here," he said, "but the prosecutor wants you available for trial dates. We'll make sure they're on your terms, not his." I nodded. It felt good to hear the words on my terms. Those words had once felt impossible. Bill walked over and handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a printout of his official testimony, signed and stamped. "A reminder," he said. "He can't rewrite it." I took it carefully, understanding exactly what that meant. For years, Mark had twisted every story. He turned lies into facts and fear into silence. But this time, the story was in writing, and it was the truth. The sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly past the house as if on cue. The deputy inside lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a silent gesture of acknowledgement. They had kept watch since the night the order was served. He wasn't coming back. Not now. Not ever. I climbed into the driver's seat of the truck. The engine rumbled low, familiar. It didn't sound like it had the day of the brake line. It sounded clean. Tyler had fixed it himself. I adjusted the mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. Not the version of me that flinched when a door opened. Not the version that whispered excuses into silence. This was different. This version was leaving. Bill leaned into the open window and tapped the side of the truck. "You're not driving alone," he said. "You've got people now." I smiled, a small, quiet smile. The kind that didn't need to be big to be real. Tyler leaned in from the passenger side. "Call when you cross the state line," he said. "And don't look back too much." I looked at the house one last time. It wasn't home. It never had been. It was the place where fear was built brick by brick, but also the place where it cracked. The place where the dashcam light blinked like a quiet rebellion. The place where the silence finally broke. I shifted into gear and pulled out of the driveway. The gravel crunched under the tires like an exhale I'd been holding for years. The road stretched out in front of me in a long gray ribbon heading west toward Colorado. I didn't look in the rearview mirror for the first few miles. The Kansas fields blurred past gold and flat and endless. The wind picked up against the side of the truck steady and sure. The further I drove, the lighter my chest felt. At a rest stop just past the county line, I parked the truck under a stand of half-bare trees and sat with the engine off. For a long time, I just listened to the wind pushing through the branches. My hands rested on the steering wheel, palms warm from the drive. I thought about the years I had lost, about the bruises no one had seen, about the fear that had crawled into the corners of my mind, like smoke. But I also thought about Bill's quiet knock on the door, Tyler's steady voice on the phone, the blue light of the dashcam blinking steady when I was on the ground, gasping for air. That light had seen me when no one else had. That light had been the start of everything. I pulled the USB from my pocket and rolled it between my fingers. It wasn't much, just a small piece of plastic and metal, but it had turned silence into something sharp. It had opened the door to everything that followed. As I merged back onto the highway, the sun started to break through the thick gray clouds in soft streaks. Kansas stretched behind me in the mirror, a flat horizon slowly fading. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's footsteps behind me. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold wind. The dashboard hummed under my hands. Tyler texted me a single line when I reached the state sign. "Proud of you." I laughed quietly to myself, a sound that felt strange and real. I texted back, "Thank you." Bill's message came a minute later. "You're not alone." I looked at the dashcam one last time. The blue light blinked steady as a heartbeat. It wasn't recording danger anymore. It was recording the road ahead. In the distance, the mountains rose like a promise. For years, Mark had owned every corner of my life. He controlled the walls, the papers, the air. But he never controlled the road, and now it belonged to me. I drove for hours. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. Every mile was a small victory. Every passing town was a reminder that the world existed beyond his control. When the sun dipped low and painted the road in gold, I stopped again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I leaned against the hood of the truck and let the wind hit my face. No hands at my throat. No footsteps behind me, just air, just sky, just the sound of my own breathing steady and strong. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving forward. Colorado wasn't a finish line. It was the beginning, a beginning that belonged to me. I climbed back into the truck, started the engine, and whispered to no one in particular, "I'm free." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. They were enough to fill the cab. Enough to settle inside my bones. The road stretched on into the dark, and I drove, not as someone escaping, but as someone who finally chose her own direction. When I crossed the Colorado state line, the sky had already deepened into that quiet blue that comes right before nightfall. The highway was nearly empty, the radio low, the dashcam still blinking its steady blue light. For the first time in years, there wasn't a shadow in my rearview mirror. It felt strange, almost too quiet, but not the kind of quiet that traps you. This was the kind that sets you free. I pulled into a small gas station at the edge of a town I didn't know the name of. The neon sign above the pump flickered soft and tired. I filled the tank, grabbed a paper cup of black coffee, and sat on the hood of the truck looking at the dark outline of the mountains in the distance. The air was cold, but it didn't bite. It cleared my head. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and turned it on myself. For years, that lens terrified me. I hated seeing the tiredness in my eyes, the quiet fear that I thought I could never name. But now, when I looked into it, I saw someone standing instead of shrinking. I hit record. My voice came out quiet at first, but it didn't shake. "If you've ever been silent," I said, "if you've ever stayed quiet because someone told you no one would believe you, I know how that feels. I lived inside that silence for years. I breathed it. I thought it was the only thing I'd ever have." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the cold air sting my lungs a little before continuing. But silence isn't safety. It's just the cage they build to keep you there. And sometimes all it takes is one piece of proof, one light blinking in the dark, one person who sees. That's all it takes to make everything start to crack. I turned the camera slightly toward the truck where the dashcam light blinked calm and steady. This little thing I said wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It just saw, and that was enough. It was enough to make the truth louder than his lies. I looked straight into the lens. "If you've ever been silent because you thought no one would believe you, I'm telling you now, proof can be power. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You just have to stop being invisible." My hands didn't shake as I ended the recording. The night had settled fully now, the air crisp and still. I uploaded the video to my channel, not with fear, but with purpose. Before closing the app, I added the line I had written weeks ago in the margins of a notebook. "Where are you watching from?" I typed. "Have you ever seen injustice and stayed silent? Tell your story." I pressed publish. The truck engine hummed softly behind me as I leaned against the hood. Somewhere out there, someone was going to hear those words. Someone who still thought silence was their only shelter. And maybe, just maybe, they'd realize it could also be their first weapon. The wind moved through the trees like a promise. I smiled quiet and steady. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of my voice. If you've ever sat in a room and felt the weight of your own silence pressing against your chest, then you already understand what it means to carry a story no one else sees. I know that feeling too well. That kind of silence doesn't just live in your throat. It moves into your bones, your breath, your heartbeat. But the moment someone chooses to speak, even if their voice shakes, something shifts. It doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real. That's why I'm here talking to you right now, looking into this lens and asking one simple thing. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of a moment you kept locked away, don't let it stay buried. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter. Because the truth is, your voice does matter. It matters more than the people who tried to silence you want to admit. And when voices like ours echo together, the silence doesn't win anymore. If you've ever whispered your story in the dark, maybe tonight is the night you whisper it a little louder. Maybe you drop a single sentence below. Maybe you just say, "I understand." Or maybe this is the moment you decide that the pain they gave you won't belong to them forever. Hit subscribe if you want to stand with voices like yours and mine. Hit like if you believe silence shouldn't own anyone. Share this story if you've ever promised yourself that one day you'd speak up. The comments here aren't just words. They're proof. Proof that people survive. Proof that the quiet can turn into something powerful. And if you're still silent right now, just know this silence doesn't mean weakness. It's just the space before courage takes its first breath. I'll be here reading every word, not as someone above you, but as someone who's been there, as someone who knows the weight, as someone who finally spoke. Tell your story. Stand with mine. and let this be the place where silence ends.